In the dense, whispering heart of the ancient forests, where sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, the Druids moved like shadows, unseen yet omnipresent. These sacred groves were not mere trees and soil. They were living temples, breathing with the weight of centuries and echoing with secrets too dark to utter aloud. The selection of forest virgins was not a gentle affair. It was a deliberate, haunting process, guided by an unyielding belief in the power that these young lives could channel, chosen for their purity, their innocence, and sometimes for inexplicable signs etched into their very being. These girls were drawn from villages often unaware of the doom shadowing their daughters. The Druids would observe from afar, sometimes for months, noting subtle gestures, peculiar marks, or the way a girl's eyes seemed to reflect the spirit of the forest itself. The atmosphere surrounding these selections was charged, almost electric, as if the trees themselves were witnesses, their gnarled limbs leaning closer, their roots twitching with anticipation. The preparation for the ritual was meticulous. Sacred circles were carved into the earth, moss and petals arranged with ceremonial precision, each placement infused with layers of meaning lost to the modern mind. Druids, adorned in robes dyed with rare plants and inscribed with cryptic runes, moved with a fluidity that seemed both human and otherworldly. The forest virgins, often unaware of their role until the final moment, were guided into these circles by a mixture of awe, fear, and the subtle manipulation that only years of ritualistic mastery could achieve. As twilight descended, the air grew thick with incense, the smoke curling and twisting as though alive, carrying with it the chants of ancient tongues long erased from common memory. The girls' hearts raced, a mixture of terror and reverence, as they began to sense the immensity of the forces surrounding them. Every element of the forest, every rustle of leaves and distant hoot of an owl became a part of the ritual. The Druids' chants rose and fell like the wind, sometimes barely audible, other times reverberating with an unnatural power that pressed on the chest of anyone nearby. It was here, in these darkened sanctuaries, that the line between the earthly and the divine blurred. The Druids believed that the Virgin's presence purified the forest, appeased the gods, and unlocked secrets no ordinary human could ever perceive. And yet, beneath this veneer of sacred duty, there was an undeniable undercurrent of dread, a recognition that the innocence of youth was being traded for knowledge and power beyond human comprehension. This juxtaposition, beauty intertwined with horror, was the very essence of Druidic practice. What strikes the modern observer, looking back through the fog of centuries, is not only the ritualistic precision, but the psychological mastery at play. These forests, alive with an almost palpable consciousness, became arenas of control and submission, where the unknowing virgins were both honored and victimized in ways that defy simple moral categorization. It is a chilling reminder of how belief, unchecked by compassion, can twist the purest intentions into something terrifying. As we peer into the shadows of these ancient rites, one cannot help but shudder, contemplating the fate of those chosen, and wonder, what whispers would these forests share if only they could speak? If you are fascinated, or horrified, by the secret lives of the Druids, share your thoughts below, leave a like, and make sure to subscribe to uncover even more dark histories hidden in plain sight. The forest itself became a collaborator in the Druids' dark artistry, shaped and prepared with painstaking devotion to the unseen powers that ruled these sacred groves. Every tree, every thicket, every shadow was accounted for, each playing a role in the looming spectacle that would unfold. paths were subtly redirected. Moss was gathered and laid to form symbols only the initiated could decipher, and natural clearings were transformed into stages for ceremonies that mingled awe with terror. The air was intentionally thickened with smoke from burning herbs, a subtle haze that seemed to bend reality, muting the ordinary world and opening the mind to extraordinary perception. This preparation was not merely practical, it was ritualistic, each act a prayer, an incantation, a binding of the forest to the intentions of the Druids. Sacred stones, collected from riverbeds or ancient sites of worship, were placed with exacting care, forming circles and lines whose meaning has been lost to time, but whose influence was undeniable. Some stones were said to hum with latent energy when the ritual reached its apex, responding to the presence of the virgins and the incantations of the Druids. Small, carved idols and effigies were hidden among roots and branches, their shapes grotesque yet mesmerizing, intended to focus the minds of all participants on the divine and the dreadful simultaneously. Even the sounds of the forest were orchestrated. The placement of drums, chimes, and wind instruments ensured that every rustle, every bird call, seemed to harmonize with the ceremony, amplifying the otherworldly atmosphere. The Druids themselves took on the role of architects of fear and reverence. Each movement, each gesture, each whispered word was calculated to elicit submission, awe, and a sense of inevitability in the hearts of the forest virgins. The preparation of the ritual space served a dual purpose. It honored the unseen forces they worshipped, and it conditioned the participants to accept, almost instinctively, the horrors and marvels to come. In this environment, time itself seemed to warp. Minutes stretched into eternity as anticipation mounted. Shadows deepened. The wind carried voices that may have been real or conjured, and the very ground seemed to thrum with expectation. This orchestration was as much a test as it was a prelude. Only those who could endure the oppressive majesty of the forest, the weight of the unseen gaze, and the tension of impending rites were deemed worthy to witness or participate in the ceremonies. The forest, in every sense, became a partner in the sacrificial drama, its life intertwined with that of the Druids and their chosen virgins. It was in these meticulously crafted natural cathedrals that the boundaries between mortal and divine, horror and sanctity, were blurred, leaving the uninitiated forever changed by their proximity to the forbidden knowledge embedded in the moss, bark, and shadow. The selection of the forest virgins was a process shrouded in mystery, deliberate and unyielding, dictated by signs that were often subtle and nearly imperceptible to ordinary eyes. The Druids believed that certain girls carried a spark, a resonance with the forest itself, visible only to those trained in the arcane arts. These signs could be as delicate as a fleeting glance at a rare bird, a strange birthmark, or a reaction to a whispered word that seemed to awaken an inner light. Families were often unaware, and in some cases, the chosen girls themselves remained oblivious to their destiny until the moment of revelation arrived. The anticipation was as much psychological as it was ceremonial. The virgins were led gently, or sometimes forcefully, into the awareness of their sacred role, an awakening that carried both wonder and dread. Once identified, the girls were secluded for a period of preparation. They were taught the hymns and gestures that would mark them as participants in the rituals, yet often without full comprehension of the ultimate purpose. Their days were filled with quiet exercises, meditative walks through the forest, and small offerings to the spirits that were said to guide and judge them. The Druids observed constantly, noting each reaction, each hesitation, each spark of courage or fear. The intention was not merely to prepare the body, but to mold the mind, ensuring that the virgin's spirits were aligned with the forest's rhythm and the demands of the sacred rites. The psychological tension during this period was immense. The virgins oscillated between awe and terror, their innocence increasingly burdened by the weight of unseen expectations. Nights were spent listening to distant chants that carried a hypnotic power, while days were consumed with rituals that subtly conditioned them to submit to the will of the Druids. It was a delicate balance. Too much fear could break the girl. Too little reverence would render her unfit for the ceremony. The Druids, masters of subtle influence, created an environment in which obedience, awe, and spiritual attunement emerged naturally, almost instinctively. Symbolism was omnipresent. Every movement through the forest, every collected herb, every whispered instruction carried layered meaning. The virgins were taught that their lives were not solely their own. They were conduits for forces far older and more powerful than mortal understanding. The initiation was not simply a social custom or a rite of passage. It was a profound transformation, preparing them to exist between worlds, suspended between the human and the divine. In this liminal space, innocence became power, fear became devotion, and the forest itself watched silently, its ancient consciousness woven into the unfolding destiny of each girl. As night fell over the sacred grove, the forest transformed into a stage of shadows and flickering torchlight, the air thick with anticipation and the sharp scent of burning herbs. The Druids, robed in dark fabrics etched with cryptic symbols, moved with deliberate precision, their faces hidden beneath hoods that concealed every emotion, every intent. The virgins, now fully aware of the ritual's magnitude, were led to the center of the ceremonial circle, their steps hesitant, echoing in the silence between chants. There was a palpable tension, a mixture of reverence and terror that seemed to vibrate through the very soil beneath their feet. The ceremony began quietly, with soft murmurs that rose into melodic, otherworldly chants. Each word, each intonation, was calculated to resonate with the ancient energies the Druids sought to invoke. The forest itself seemed to respond. Branches swayed, though no wind blew, shadows stretched unnaturally, and distant cries, animal or spirit, pierced the night, blurring the line between the natural and the supernatural. The virgins were both observers and participants, their presence crucial to the efficacy of the rites. Every subtle gesture, every hesitant breath, was absorbed into the rhythm of the ritual, binding them ever closer to the will of the Druids and the entities they worshipped. Symbols carved into the earth began to glow faintly under the torchlight, their significance lost to modern understanding but powerful in their effect. The air pulsed with unseen energy, pressing against the chest and stirring the imagination, forcing an acknowledgement of forces far beyond human comprehension. The Druids moved among the virgins with ritualized gestures that communicated authority and dominance, enforcing obedience not through threat, but through the silent weight of tradition and perceived divine sanction. The young girl's fear was a mirror of the forest's own ancient consciousness, both captured and amplified by the orchestrated rites. What modern observers often fail to grasp is the psychological mastery at work. The ceremony was not simply about appeasing gods or spirits, it was about control, about bending both mind and body to the rhythm of the sacred, terrifying power. By the time the ritual reached its apex, the virgins had been reshaped, their innocence transformed into an instrument of mystical potency, their terror refined into reverence. This was the cruel elegance of Druidic practice, terrifying, mesmerizing, and incomprehensibly profound. If the chilling intensity of these ancient rites has captured your imagination, share your thoughts below, leave a like, and subscribe to explore even deeper into the hidden horrors of the Druids' sacred forests. The artifacts used by the Druids were far more than mere tools. They were conduits of ancient power, imbued with symbolism and designed to enforce the ritual's gravitas. Carved from bone, wood, and stone, these implements carried markings that were invisible to the untrained eye, yet potent with meaning to those initiated into Druidic mysteries. Knives with handles shaped like serpents, chalices etched with spirals that mirrored the eternal cycles of nature, and staffs crowned with carved animal heads. All were carefully arranged within the ceremonial circle, each positioned to channel energy and direct attention toward the intended outcome of the rite. The virgins, though often uncomprehending of the true purpose, could sense the weight these objects carried, their very presence instilling awe and trepidation. Some tools were functional, intended to draw blood as an offering to the gods, while others served purely symbolic roles, representing the intersection of life, death, and the unseen forces governing the forest. Each movement with these artifacts was deliberate, a choreography that intertwined physical action with spiritual intent. Even the sound of a staff tapping against stone or a chalice placed upon the moss-laden earth had a rhythm designed to mesmerize and prepare the participants, reinforcing their submission to the Druidic authority. The Druids' mastery lay not merely in wielding these objects, but in their ability to transform them into extensions of the forest's own consciousness. The virgins were trained to understand, at least superficially, the significance of each artifact. Some were asked to hold, touch, or present these sacred items at precise moments, reinforcing the notion that their very bodies were vessels for sacred power. Their fear and reverence were heightened by the artifact's imposing presence, as if each object bore witness to their fate and echoed the silent judgment of centuries past. The tactile, visual, and auditory elements of these tools combined to create a multisensory immersion, ensuring that the ceremony left a permanent mark on the psyche of every participant. These artifacts were more than instruments. They were symbols of control, belief, and the inexorable link between mortal action and divine consequence. They reminded both Druids and virgins that in the forest, every gesture, every breath, and every pulse was intertwined with forces far beyond human understanding. The tools themselves seemed to hum with life, resonating with the shadows that twisted between the trees and bearing witness to the unholy reverence and subtle horrors that defined Druidic ritual. The symbolic meaning of blood and offerings in Druidic rituals extended far beyond the literal act. Blood, whether from animals or the chosen virgins, was considered a sacred essence, a bridge between the mortal realm and the unseen forces that governed the forest. Its presence on the ritual stones and woven into the earth's soil was believed to awaken latent powers, drawing attention from deities whose names have been lost to history. Each drop was measured not by quantity, but by its spiritual resonance, a subtle yet devastating reminder of the delicate balance between life and sacrifice. The virgins, acutely aware of the gravity of their role, experienced a mixture of terror and reverence, feeling themselves transformed into vessels for forces beyond comprehension. Offerings were carefully curated, drawn from nature itself. Rare herbs, finely carved wooden figurines, and precious minerals imbued with symbolic meaning. These were not mere gifts, but intentional acts of devotion, designed to attract, appease, and manipulate the energies believed to inhabit the sacred. Groves. The positioning of each offering was deliberate, reflecting an intricate understanding of cosmology and the cyclical patterns that the Druids revered. The forest seemed to absorb these gifts, as though the trees, roots, and stones themselves were conscious participants in the ceremony. The interplay between blood and offerings created a layered ritualistic experience, blending the tangible and the ethereal. The Druids' chants wove these elements together, forming an unseen network of power that pulsed through the grove. The Virgins' reactions were carefully observed, their emotions considered as important as the physical acts themselves. Fear, awe, and even faint resistance were interpreted as signals of alignment or discord with the spiritual energies. This duality of observation and manipulation reinforced the total control the Druids exerted over both the sacred space and those within it. The consequences of these acts were profound. To the Druids, the successful integration of blood and offerings represented a communion with forces older than memory, a temporary transcendence of the human condition. To the Virgins, it was a baptism into a terrifying and incomprehensible reality, a crossing of thresholds from innocence into something that blurred the line between life, death, and devotion. In these moments, the forest was not merely a backdrop, but an active participant. Its ancient wisdom and hidden consciousness mirrored in the rituals themselves, forever entwined with the fate of those who walked its shadowed paths. Stories of survivors and whispered legends have survived the passage of centuries, their voices echoing faintly through the dense canopy of history. Some virgins, miraculously spared from the final acts of the ritual, carried with them memories so vivid and haunting that they became living conduits for the forest's dark secrets. They spoke of the silence that fell before a chant, the way the torches flickered as if in response to an unseen presence, and the eerie calm that settled over the grove when the Druids moved in perfect synchronization. Each account, whether exaggerated by fear or sharpened by trauma, revealed the extraordinary psychological mastery of the Druids, their ability to bend perception, to weave awe and terror into a single, undeniable reality. The legends are numerous and chilling. In one account, a young girl described feeling the forest itself breathing, the trees' gnarled branches pressing down as though to judge her worth. In another, a virgin recalled the sensation of being simultaneously watched and guided by forces unseen, as if every shadow held intent and every rustle of leaves carried meaning. These narratives, passed orally from generation to generation, were warnings as much as they were records. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of the forest's power, cautioning that even proximity could summon misfortune. The survivals and tales became intertwined with the identity of the people living at the forest's edge, shaping their beliefs and instilling a profound respect, tinged with fear for the Druids and their rites. The psychological impact of these experiences cannot be overstated. The survivors often displayed signs of trauma, their memories punctuated by fragmented recollections of chants, symbols, and the imposing presence of the Druids. Yet, these recollections also contained knowledge, subtle insights into the ritual's purpose, and the symbolic, meanings embedded within each movement and offering. What modern researchers and archaeologists can glean from these accounts is invaluable. Glimpses into practices that were carefully hidden, intentionally obscured, and yet left traces in the collective memory of those who lived to tell the tale. Even in legend, the survivors' experiences underscore the duality of Druidic influence, the capacity to inspire devotion and terror simultaneously, to wield power without physical force, and to craft an environment where perception itself became the mechanism of control. These accounts, haunting and evocative, remind us that the legacy of the Druids was not solely in their rituals, but in the indelible imprint left upon the minds and souls of those who crossed their path. If these chilling testimonies intrigue you, leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and reflections. Modern interpretations of Druidic rituals rely on a delicate combination of archaeology, historical texts, and folklore, piecing together fragments that survived the erosion of time. Archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial circles, carved stones, and remnants of offerings in areas once known to be centers of Druidic activity, offering glimpses into practices that were otherwise deliberately obscured. These artifacts, often buried beneath layers of soil or hidden in dense forests, provide tangible evidence that corroborates the chilling oral histories passed down through generations. Even without complete understanding, the arrangement of stones, traces of blood, and symbolic carvings reveal a complex system of belief and control, blending spirituality with psychological dominance. Scholars have noted that many of these rituals were designed to manipulate perception, not merely to enact physical rites. The spatial arrangement of sacred groves, the use of elevated platforms, and the careful choreography of light and shadow all suggest an acute awareness of human psychology. The Druids understood that the forest itself could amplify ritual impact. A rustle in the undergrowth could become a divine signal. A sudden breeze could signify a god's approval. The Virgin's terror and awe were therefore not incidental. They were an essential component of the ritual's power, ensuring that belief and obedience were intertwined with fear and reverence. Forensic analysis of skeletal remains and remnants of offerings has also begun to shed light on the more brutal aspects of these ceremonies. Marks on bones suggest that some sacrifices involved both ritualized wounding and symbolic gestures designed to evoke spiritual energy. Chemical traces found in soil samples indicate the use of rare herbs and resins, burned to create hallucinogenic smoke, or to mask the scent of blood, further enhancing the perception of supernatural presence. These discoveries reveal the methodical and deliberate nature of Druidic rites. They were not chaotic acts of violence, but structured ceremonies designed to achieve specific spiritual outcomes. By examining these elements, modern researchers can reconstruct the psychological and symbolic mechanics of Druidic practices, gaining insight into how the boundaries between life, death, and devotion were orchestrated. The more evidence we uncover, the clearer it becomes that the ancient forest rituals were a sophisticated blend of faith, fear, and ritualized power, a haunting testament to human ingenuity twisted by devotion to the unknowable. Each stone, each trace of blood, each whisper of the past reminds us that the line between sacred and sinister was often imperceptibly thin. When comparing Druidic rituals with those of other ancient cultures, striking patterns emerge, revealing shared human obsessions with control, sacrifice, and communion with the divine. Across Europe, the Near East, and even parts of the Americas, communities engaged in ceremonies that combined the elements of fear, reverence, and meticulous ritual. While the tools and symbols differed, the underlying psychological architecture was remarkably similar. Initiates were selected, spaces were carefully prepared, and the natural environment was harnessed to amplify both awe and terror. The Druids, in this sense, were not anomalies, but participants in a broader, shadowy human tradition. Yet their mastery of forested landscapes gave their practices a uniquely haunting resonance. In Mediterranean cultures, for example, young women were sometimes dedicated to priestly roles, undergoing complex rites of passage that involved symbolic death and rebirth. The use of blood, ritualized objects, and sacred spaces echoes the Druidic ceremonies, suggesting a common understanding of the power of fear, symbolism, and controlled environments. Similarly, in parts of ancient Mesopotamia, sacrifices were performed in highly orchestrated spaces where every detail, from chants to incense, was designed to evoke spiritual compliance and awe. The recurring theme across these disparate cultures is the transformation of human perception. Ritual participants were systematically reshaped in body, mind, and spirit to align with the will of the divine or the elite practitioners of the faith. Despite these similarities, the Druids' unique manipulation of forests set their rites apart. While other civilizations relied on constructed temples or built altars, the Druids' sanctuaries were living, breathing ecosystems. Every rustle of leaves, the flight of a bird, or the whisper of wind became a part of the ritual narrative, making the experience simultaneously intimate and terrifying. It was in these forests that the psychological sophistication of their rites reached its apex, merging environment, human perception, and symbolic action into ceremonies of profound and unsettling power. By examining these parallels, historians and archaeologists gain not only a clearer understanding of Druidic rituals, but also insight into a recurring human compulsion: the desire to structure fear and wonder into an experience that transcends ordinary life. In this light, the practices of the Druids are both a product of their time and a reflection of a universal, shadowy impulse, a chilling testament to the lengths humans have gone to commune with the unknowable. The legacy of the Druids persists in subtle, often overlooked ways, whispering through the rituals, folklore, and occult practices that survived the erosion of centuries. Though their sacred forests have long since receded before human expansion, the echoes of their ceremonies linger in the collective imagination, influencing modern interpretations of magic, spirituality, and the mysterious. The methods they employed, psychological mastery, symbolic manipulation, and the orchestration of natural spaces, continue to fascinate researchers, historians, and those drawn to the darker edges of human belief. In examining their practices, one cannot ignore the moral complexity. Acts of devotion entwined with terror, rituals of reverence shadowed by human suffering. The Druids' influence extends beyond the purely historical. Contemporary occult traditions often incorporate elements reminiscent of their rites, from the reverence for nature to the use of ritualized objects and symbolic gestures. Though transformed and reinterpreted, the essence remains: the careful crafting of experience to inspire awe and submission, a manipulation of perception that resonates as much with the mind as with the spirit. By tracing these threads from ancient groves to modern ceremonial practices, we can witness the enduring power of ritual to shape consciousness, to elevate fear into a sacred instrument, and to bind participants to forces far beyond their ordinary comprehension. Ultimately, the story of the Forest Virgins and the Druids is a meditation on human fascination with power, mystery, and the unknown. It is a tale of how innocence can be harnessed, transformed, and enmeshed with the sacred, and how the natural world can be wielded as both stage and participant in acts of devotion and horror. As we reflect on these shadowed histories, we are reminded that the past is never truly gone. It seeps into the present, waiting to be uncovered, examined, and understood. The ancient forests may have fallen silent, but their stories still speak, urging curiosity, caution, and reverence in equal measure. If this journey into the hidden and horrifying world of the Druids intrigued you, subscribe to continue exploring the darkest corners of history. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, And don't miss the next video that will reveal even more ancient secrets lurking in forgotten forests.